Good morning, everyone. In last week's Gospel, Jesus seemed to wipe out the distinction between clean and unclean foods, a really radical thing to suggest to a Jewish community who keep kosher. And in both stories in today's Gospel, Jesus is crossing the boundary between clean and unclean people, between Jewish people and Gentile or non-Jewish people. As both the Syrophoenician woman and this deaf man in the Decapolis are Gentiles. Jesus shares God's power and love with those who are not seen as God's people, because God wants everyone to be invited to the party. But each of these stories has its own message too. I'm going to start with the story about the deaf and dumb man, which fulfills the prophecy from Isaiah, which Patrick quoted from earlier. The eyes of the blind shall be opened, and the ears of the deaf unstopped. I noticed that Jesus took the man aside, away from the crowd. He related to him as an individual, a person in his own right. Jesus didn't just talk to the man's friends. And he used actions so that this deaf man could understand what he was doing. Those who are deaf or hard of hearing, as some of us are getting now, can feel excluded from conversations and what's going on. But Jesus makes sure that this man is part of the process of his own healing. What I really love here is that Mark gives us the actual Aramaic word that Jesus used. And to me, it brings the story really close. Jesus says, Ephphatha, be opened. And that's a reminder for us too, to open our minds and hearts and look for our own prejudices and the unconscious ways we exclude or hurt others. So this story is really rich in its message to us. Let's have our next song, and after that, we'll look at the other story in our Gospel today. Let's look now at the first of the two stories in our Gospel today. Jesus' words to the woman are shocking. He calls her, as a Gentile, a dog. Now, I think it's important not to whitewash Jesus' words or make excuses for them, but let them challenge us to think more deeply about what's going on. So why does Jesus say something so rude? Is he saying it to see how the woman reacts, or to teach the disciples? He's still being hurtful. Or has he inherited the prejudices of his people? Is that possible if he's God as well as human? Whatever the reason, after the woman's gentle, witty reply, Jesus changes his response and he shows compassion. I've thought about this conversation a lot during the week, and I think maybe Jesus said what he said to put the spotlight on the woman, to make clear that she's the hero or the heroine. She's the central character. Jesus wants us to pay attention to her faith, her persistence, and her willingness to challenge prejudice with courtesy and humour. And through this exchange, this conversation, Jesus is showing us that inheriting bias is inevitable, but holding on to it is a choice. There are times when it's good and necessary to change our minds. As Jesus says, Ephphatha, be opened.